My parents laughed and said, "You are not part of this family." I raised my glass and replied, "Fine, then don't ask me for money anymore." Their faces turned pale with surprise. I ordered a bottle of Dom Perignon champagne from 2012, even though I knew that my parents wouldn't know it from the cheapest sparkling wine in the supermarket. But tonight was a special night, and I wanted to celebrate in a big way. Yesterday, I was just a senior marketing manager, and today, I was the marketing director of Askant Innovations, with a separate office, a personal assistant, and a salary that was almost twice as much as the previous one. To my daughter, my father raised his glass as the waiter poured the champagne, who, well, now earns more than my mother and I have earned in our entire lives. He smiled, but there was no warmth in it. Thomas Finch, a 57-year-old history professor at a local college, had never been able to be genuinely happy about my successes, especially if they somehow emphasized his own failures. "Thank you, Dad." I took a sip, feeling the bubbles tickle my throat. "But you always did your best to give me a good education." "Don't minimize your accomplishments, Audrey." My mother, Margaret, took a bite of olive oil bread. "You were always persistent." Tenacious, in her dictionary, meant stubborn. It was one of the more veiled compliments I'd heard in 32 years. "Where's Ryan?" I tried not to show my disappointment at my little brother's absence. "I thought he was coming today." "Amber has a fever," my mother sighed, "and Melissa didn't want to leave her with the nanny." Of course she didn't. Melissa, my brother's wife, always had a reason why they couldn't come to events where I was the center of attention. "Give them my regards." I picked up the menu. "Did something happen to my card to pay for Amber's tuition at Northern Prep?" I got some weird message from the school. My parents exchanged glances. "It's a little complicated." My father cleared his throat. "Ryan's a little behind on his house payment, and we temporarily used the funds to help him out." "You what?" I put the menu down. "You took the money I sent specifically for Amber's tuition and gave it to Ryan to pay the mortgage?" "Don't make a big deal out of it, Audrey." My father waved his hand. I pulled myself together. Today is my day. I'm not going to let them ruin it. Dinner was peaceful enough. We talked about neutral topics, a new movie, a book, plans for the summer. I avoided mentioning my work, knowing that it would trigger a new wave of passive-aggressive comments about how I had sold out to corporations instead of following in their academic footsteps. By dessert, my parents had already had a few glasses of wine. I ordered an expensive Pinot Noir, knowing their weakness for good red. Margaret's cheeks flushed, and Thomas became noticeably louder. "To my daughter." He raised his glass again, this time with a slightly unsteady hand. "Who has succeeded against all odds." "Against what, Dad?" I raised an eyebrow, feeling the first hint of irritation. "Well, you know." He waved his hand. "You weren't as gifted as Ryan. He always picked up on things on the fly, and you had to work much harder." "Thomas," Mom said warningly, but it was too late. "What?" He looked at her with glassy eyes. "I'm not saying anything bad. On the contrary, it's a compliment. Our Audrey compensated for everything with perseverance. Although, of course, intellectual work is not quite the same as an academic career." "Enough," Margaret interrupted him. "Audrey knows that we are proud of her." "I do?" I smiled, but the smile did not touch my eyes. "I'm not sure." "Oh, don't start with your complexes again." My father rolled his eyes. "We have always treated you the same as Ryan, maybe even paid more attention, given the circumstances." "What circumstances?" I was wary. Something in their expressions changed. My mother suddenly began to stare at her dessert, and my father took another big gulp of wine. "Nothing much," Margaret answered too quickly. "You just always needed more direction." "No." I put down my fork. "There's something you're not telling me. What are the circumstances?" The silence around the table grew heavy. My father looked up at the ceiling, as if searching for clues, and then exhaled sharply. "Well, since we're on the subject," he shrugged, You do realize that we've always considered you a real part of the family, no matter what. My heart skipped a beat. What do you mean, no matter what? And what does a real part of the family mean? Thomas, we're not going to discuss this now. Margaret pressed her lips together so hard they turned white. She's a successful, independent woman. It's time to know the truth, isn't it? What truth? I enunciated each word clearly now, as I always did when I was trying to keep my cool. That you're not our biological daughter, my father blurted out, as if it were the most normal thing in the world. The world around me stopped. The sounds of the restaurant, the clinking of dishes, hushed conversations, soft music, all faded into the background. I could hear my own pulse in my ears. What? I finally managed to get out. Thomas, we agreed. Margaret's hiss came through cotton wool. Oh, come on, Margaret. He waved it off. I don't understand. My voice trembled. You adopted me? And you never told her? My father shrugged. Not exactly adopted. It was more informal. We took you in as a favor for a friend of mine, Elaine. She got pregnant at 19 and couldn't raise you. We had just gotten married, and Margaret couldn't have children because of health problems. A favor? The word hit me like a slap in the face. It doesn't sound like that, my mother interjected, clutching a napkin. We loved you from day one. You were our daughter in everything but biology. Why didn't you ever tell me? I tried to process the information, but my brain refused to work. 32 years and not a word? We were going to tell you when you were older. Margaret didn't look me in the eye. But then I got pregnant with Ryan when you were 2.5. It was like a miracle. And we thought, why complicate it? Why complicate it? I repeated like an echo. You've been hiding who I am from me my whole life. Don't be so dramatic, Audrey. My father gestured to the waiter. More wine, please. And the check, please, in my name. No need. I raised my hand sharply. I'll pay. We can afford to pay for a dinner in honor of your promotion. Thomas frowned. Really? My voice was icy. Like Amber's tuition? Or the roof repair on your house last year? What are you talking about? My father recoiled. I'm talking about the fact that I've been financially supporting this entire family for the last 8 years. I've been paying for my niece's education. I save my brother from debt collectors. I buy you new equipment, pay for repairs, send you money in case of unforeseen expenses. And all this time, you knew that My voice broke. You're exaggerating, Margaret winced. Yes, you're generous, but we're not some beggars living off you. Last month, you asked for $5,000 for a new roof. I pulled out my phone and opened my transfer history. The month before that, $2,000 for Dad's dental treatment. The month before that, $3,000 for Ryan's wedding anniversary present. Doesn't the money I transfer every month for Amber's education count at all? That's what families do. Dad sipped his wine angrily. They help each other. We raised you, gave you everything we could. Now it's your turn to support the family. Family? I laughed bitterly. The same family that it turns out I was never really a part of? Don't twist our words. Margaret reached out to touch mine, but I pulled mine away. We never said you weren't part of the family. No? I looked at my father. What about we've always seen you as a real part of the family? What does that mean, if not that I'm not really part of it? Thomas sighed in exasperation. You've always been overly sensitive. It's just words. What does it matter where you came from? We raised you as our own child. What difference does it make? I couldn't believe my ears. You've been hiding my origins from me my whole life, and now you're telling me about it over dinner as if it's no big deal? Not ours, Margaret stammered. Just not biologically ours. But we've always loved you. Loved you? I looked her in the eye. You called me stubborn and overly sensitive. You constantly compared me to Ryan. You criticized my every choice, from my clothes to my career. Is that love? Don't exaggerate. Dad shook his head. All parents criticize their children, And all parents hide from their children that they're not a real part of the family? I felt tears coming to my eyes, but I held them back. You're twisting it again, Margaret sighed. You know we didn't mean it. What did you mean? I looked at them both. Please explain to me what you meant. The silence lingered. My father twirled his glass in his hands, and my mother nervously crumpled her napkin. Well, technically, Thomas finally said, you're not part of the Finch family by blood, but that doesn't mean we haven't treated you like a daughter. Technically? I felt the last vestiges of my composure leave me. So all these years of you taking money from me for family needs was, what? Charity for strangers? Don't be ridiculous, Audrey, my father grimaced. Of course we're family, just not in the traditional sense. I took a deep breath, trying to gather my thoughts. Okay, I finally said. If my background doesn't matter, then why have you always treated me differently than Ryan? Why were my grades never good enough? Why was my work always not intellectual enough? It's completely unrelated, Margaret exhaled. Ryan had a special need for support. He's more sensitive. More sensitive? I couldn't believe my ears. You just called me overly sensitive. That's not the same thing. My father waved his hand. Look, Audrey, we didn't mean to spoil your night. We just thought it was time you knew the truth. It doesn't change anything. It changes everything. I pulled out my wallet and put my credit card on the table. And now I realize why. Because I have always been a stranger to you. A favor you gave to some girl named Elaine. Audrey, sit down. My father looked at me sternly. You're acting like a child. No, Thomas. I called him by his first name for the first time. I'm acting like a man who has just found out that his whole life has been built on a lie. The waiter came over with the terminal, and I quickly paid, adding a generous tip. Audrey, don't make a big deal out of this. Margaret followed me. You're still our daughter, regardless of your biology. I looked around, feeling something inside me finally break. You just said I'm not a real part of the family. My voice was quiet but firm. And you know what? I believe you. I do now. I took my wine glass, which was still almost full, and raised it in a final toast. My parents laughed and said, You're not part of this family. And I said it loud enough for them both to hear. Very well, then don't ask me for money anymore. I drank the wine in one gulp, set it down on the table, and turned to leave. Audrey! Margaret grabbed my arm. Don't go like that. We can talk about this. 32 years. I gently but firmly released her hand. You've had 32 years to talk. Now it's my turn, to think. I walked out of the restaurant without looking back, feeling the cool evening air drying the tears that had finally begun to flow down my cheeks. I always knew something was wrong. It was an elusive feeling that had haunted me for as long as I could remember. Even in my earliest memories, when we lived in a small house near the college where my parents taught, I felt different. Not like other children. Not like the Finch children were supposed to be. Now, sitting in my apartment after that fateful dinner, I searched through my memories, looking for the signs I had missed. They were everywhere. When I was 5, my mother and I were looking through a family album. I really liked the photos of my parents from their youth, Margaret, with long hair and a wide dress, Thomas with sideburns and glasses that were in fashion at the time. On each page, I looked for my baby self, but I couldn't find it. Where are the pictures of me when I was little? I asked, flipping through the pages. My mom hesitated, a strange expression flashing across her face. We didn't really like taking pictures, and the camera wasn't that good back then. The album was coming to an end, and there were no photos of me until I was 3. But there was a whole series of pictures of my mom holding a newborn Ryan, and me, a 5-year-old, standing next to her with a tight smile. When I was 8, I felt for the first time that my achievements would never be enough. I brought home a math test with an A- grade. Well done, my mom said, barely glancing at the paper. But you need to work on your fractions. They're not very good. A week later, Ryan, then 5.5, brought home his first star for his drawing. Our genius! His dad exclaimed, scooping him up in his arms. We're going to hang this on the fridge. That drawing hung there for years. My test disappeared into the trash the next day. At 13, I won a school essay contest. My English teacher said I had a real talent for words. I couldn't wait to share the news with my mother, a literature teacher. That's great, Audrey, she said when I showed her the certificate. But don't get too carried away. Writing is a great hobby, but not a profession. That evening, she spent an hour telling me about the difficulties of a literary career, how many talented people go unrecognized, and how important it is to choose something more secure. And when Ryan wrote a short story for a school assignment at the age of 10, his parents organized a real reading party, inviting their teacher colleagues. They all took turns praising his extraordinary talent and extraordinary imagery. Even then, I knew that no matter what I did, Ryan would always be the best. Not because he was really a genius, he was an ordinary boy with normal abilities. But in the eyes of his parents, he was special. He was their true son. When it came time to go to college, I chose Northwestern University, which was quite prestigious, but not the one where my parents worked. I needed distance, a chance to become myself. Marketing! My father did not hide his disappointment when I told him about my choice of specialty. It's just the ability to tell a good lie to sell people things they don't need. It's about understanding consumer psychology and creating value, I argued, already knowing it was useless. It's a shame you didn't choose something intellectual, my mother sighed. Something really useful for society. I didn't tell them I got a full scholarship. I didn't want to listen to them belittle that achievement. My years at college were the happiest. For the first time, I breathed freely, without constant comparisons and criticism. My professors appreciated my work. My friends accepted me for who I was. I started to believe in myself. That's where I met Lauren Nguyen, my roommate, who became my best friend. Outspoken, direct, with a sharp mind and a huge heart, she was the first person to tell me the truth. Your family is toxic, she said after my first Christmas home, when I came back in tears because of another comment from my father about my inability to do real science. They just want what's best for me, I defended myself, repeating the line I'd been telling myself for years. No, Lauren shook her head. They want you to be someone else. It's not the same thing. She was right, but I wasn't ready to admit it yet. After graduation, I got a job at a marketing agency in Chicago. My parents were reserved in their congratulations. Ryan was already studying at the prestigious Amherst, studying art history, a real science, unlike my commercial specialty. But I loved my job. I was good at it, very good. After 3 years, I was promoted to senior manager, and after 5 years, to head of the department. My salary grew, and I started helping my family. At first, it was small things. A new washing machine for my parents when the old one broke down. Tickets to a show my mom had wanted to see for a long time. Ski equipment for Ryan for Christmas. Then there were the bigger things. A contribution to their home renovation, paying for insurance for medical treatment when his father was diagnosed with heart problems. When Ryan married Melissa and Amber was born, I offered to pay for her private school education. I thought it would bring us closer together. I thought if I was successful enough, generous enough, they would finally see my value. They would recognize me. But it didn't happen. My generosity was taken for granted. My money was easily accepted, but my personality, my achievements, were still not good enough. You do realize that your job is just about money, my dad said one night at dinner. Ryan is doing something really important. He's researching history, teaching students, expanding the horizons of knowledge. At the time, Ryan was barely making ends meet as a teaching assistant with a meager salary, living in a house I helped pay the mortgage for, and driving a car I helped him buy. You're trying to buy their love, Audrey, she would say during our weekly calls. But it doesn't work. It never has. It's not, I argued. I'm just helping my family. It's normal. It's normal to help. It's not normal to be an ATM for people who don't value you. I brushed off her words, but somewhere deep inside I knew she was right. There were other signs that I ignored. When I asked about my birth, the answers were always vague, with strange pauses and glances between my parents. Who cut the umbilical cord when I was born? I asked once when we were watching a movie with a scene of childbirth. Uh, a doctor, of course, my dad answered after an awkward pause. And were you in the delivery room? I was in the hospital, he answered evasively. Once, when I was going through old documents looking for my birth certificate for a new passport, I couldn't find it. When I asked my parents, they said that they must have lost it when they moved. But we haven't moved since I was born, I pointed out. There was that fire in the basement, remember? My mother quickly replied. I didn't remember any fire, but I didn't insist. I ordered a duplicate certificate and forgot about it. There were also times when I accidentally heard snippets of conversations that abruptly ended as soon as I entered the room. Strange phone calls that made my mom look worried. The annual postcards from some Auntie Lane I had never met, but which always caused tense conversations between my parents. All these little things added up to a picture that I refused to see, because the truth was too painful to accept. And now, sitting alone in my apartment, I finally allowed myself to see the full picture. I have always been an outsider in my own family, not because I wasn't good enough, smart enough, or successful enough, but because I was not theirs. The phone was ringing off the hook with calls and messages. Margaret, Thomas, even Ryan, they all suddenly needed to talk to me. They were all concerned about my emotional reaction. I turned off my phone. I needed time. Time to process 32 years of living a lie. Time to realize who I really am. In the meantime, I allowed myself to feel all the pain I had been holding back for so long. To feel it, to accept it, and finally to begin to free myself from the invisible chains that had held me all these years. The next morning after the fateful dinner, I woke up with eyes swollen with tears and a feeling of emptiness. The phone I finally turned on showed 27 missed calls and 32 messages. Some were from colleagues congratulating me on my promotion, but most were from Margaret, Thomas, and even Ryan. We need to talk. You've got it all wrong. Audrey, please call me. Mom is very upset. Don't do anything you'll regret. No, I'm sorry. No acknowledgement that they did something wrong. Typical. I put the phone down without answering and called the bank. In 15 minutes, I canceled all the automatic payments that went to my parents' account and Amber's tuition. Then, I blocked their numbers and headed to the office, where my first day at my new job awaited me. The week passed in a whirlwind of work. I consciously immersed myself in it, avoiding thoughts of what had happened. But the reality caught up with me on Friday, when Ryan appeared at the entrance to my office building. We need to talk, he said, blocking my path. Not here, I replied coldly, feeling my colleagues staring at us. Then where? You've been ignoring our calls for a week. We found a quiet coffee shop around the corner. Ryan looked tired, with dark circles under his eyes. At another time, I would have been worried about him, but now I felt only cold detachment. What's going on, Audrey? He sighed when we finally sat down. You canceled all the payments without warning. Amber's school called about the arrears. What did you expect? I looked him straight in the eye. That I would continue to pay everything as if nothing had happened? Look, I understand that you're shocked by what you found out. He lowered his voice. But that doesn't change the fact that we're a family. Family? I laughed bitterly. The same one that I'm not technically a part of? That's what your father said, remember? Ryan ran a hand through his hair, a gesture he'd picked up from Thomas. It's just words, Audrey. You know, Dad, sometimes he speaks without thinking, especially when he's been drinking. It's not just words. I gripped my coffee cup so hard I was afraid it would crack. It's my life. A life that turned out to be a lie. No one lied to you about important things, Ryan sighed. Yes, they didn't tell you about the circumstances of your arrival in the family. But what does it matter? They raised you as their own. Really? I raised an eyebrow. Then why have I spent my whole life feeling like I wasn't good enough? Why have my accomplishments always been diminished, while yours have been elevated to the heavens? He looked away, not having an answer. Look, he continued after a pause, I didn't come here to argue. Amber has a medical problem. She needs surgery, and her insurance only covers part of it. We can't do it without your help. And there it is. Not an apology, not an attempt to understand my pain, just a request for money wrapped in guilt. What's wrong with her? I was worried about my niece, despite everything. It's nothing fatal, but if we don't treat it now, there will be complications. I looked at my brother, trying to figure out if this was true or just another manipulation. I don't believe you're using your own child's health to put pressure on me, I finally said. It's not pressure, he flashed. Not everyone has a high-paying job like you. We do our best. And what stops you from looking for a better job? From working part-time? Selling that second car I helped you buy? Ryan shook his head. Success has changed you. No, I leaned forward. The truth has changed me. And you know what? If Amber really needs surgery, send me all the medical records and bills. I'll pay the hospital directly, but not another dollar to you or your parents. I stood up, leaving him sitting there with his mouth open. I need legal advice, I said when she answered the phone. Is it serious? Lauren, who worked as a lawyer in a large firm, immediately switched to professional mode. I want to find out the truth about my ancestry. I want to find my biological mother. After a long conversation, during which I told her everything, Lauren agreed to help. It's not really my specialty, but I know some good people, she said. I'll be in town tomorrow. We'll meet and make a plan. The next day, Lauren showed up with a folder of documents and a determined look on her face. From what you said, their informal arrangement sounds questionable from a legal standpoint, she said, spreading the papers out on my kitchen table. If there was no formal adoption, that could be a problem. How so? Well, technically, you might not have legal rights as their child, in terms of inheritance, for example. I laughed bitterly. As if they have anything to inherit after all the money I've given them. Lauren nodded. But there's another side to it. If there was no legal adoption, your birth mother may still have some legal rights. I just want to know the truth, I said. And if Thomas is really my biological father. Let's start with your birth certificate. Lauren pulled out a notepad. What did it say? The names Margaret and Thomas Finch as my parents, I shrugged. But after what happened, I'm not sure that's true. We should check the original records, and we should hire a private investigator to find this Elaine. Do you have any information on her, other than her name? Only that she was a student of mine, Thomas, and that she was 19 when I was born. Lauren made notes. That's enough to get us started. I know a good detective who works with our firm. 2 weeks later, we had results. The private investigator Lauren had hired was a real wizard. Not only did he find my original birth certificate, but he also tracked down Elaine Vale, who now lived in Milwaukee, just a 2-hour drive from Chicago. The original birth certificate was the first shock. It listed Elaine Vale as the mother, and left the space for the father's name blank. But what was most striking was that the document was signed by Margaret and Thomas Finch as legal guardians, not parents. They didn't even legally adopt me, I whispered, looking at the copy of the document. They just took me in. That's unusual, Lauren said cautiously. The next day, we left for Milwaukee. I stayed up all night thinking about meeting the woman who had given birth to me 32 years earlier, and then gave me away as a favor. Elaine Vale lived in a neat house with a small garden. When she opened the door, I froze. The woman in front of us, who was in her mid-50s, had my eyes, my nose, my jawline. It was like looking into a mirror that showed me the future. Audrey! Her voice trembled, and her eyes filled with tears. I didn't know what to say. The whole scenario I had rehearsed had evaporated. Lauren gently pushed me forward. Yes, I finally managed to get out. Elaine invited us inside, her hands shaking as she poured the tea. Some part of me wanted to hate this woman, but I could only see the deep pain and remorse in her eyes. I didn't know you were coming, she said, but I've been waiting for this day for 32 years. Why did you give me up? The question came out before I could stop myself. Elaine took a deep breath. It's a long story, and not one I'm proud of. She looked me straight in the eye. But you deserve to know the truth. The whole truth. And she told me how, at 19 years old, as a freshman, she fell in love with her young, charismatic history professor, Thomas Finch. How he reciprocated her love, despite the fact that he was married. How the short but passionate affair ended when she discovered she was pregnant. He panicked. Elaine looked at her hands. He had just been hired for a permanent position. If the truth came out, his career would have been ruined. So he knew. I felt my breath catch in my throat. Elaine nodded slowly. He did. And it was his idea for you and Margaret to take me, to have a baby. I could barely speak. To cover up the scandal. Yes, Elaine looked down. He convinced Margaret it was the best thing for everyone. She couldn't have children, and it seemed perfect. And you? I couldn't keep the anger out of my voice. You just agreed to give your child away? I was 19, Elaine answered quietly. I was scared, lonely. My parents disowned me when they found out I was pregnant. Thomas said you'd have a better life with them, that I could finish my studies, start over, and that I could see you. See me? I looked at her in shock. We've never met. We have. Elaine shook her head, her eyes filling with tears. I came as a family friend. Then, when Margaret got pregnant with Ryan, they said it was best to stop coming, that it would confuse you. I remembered the strange visits of strange women in our house when I was little. Could one of them be my real mother? But we kept in touch, Elaine continued. I sent postcards. I called. Thomas sent pictures, told me about your progress. All this time, I felt tears streaming down my cheeks. All this time you all knew the truth, and I've been living a lie. Elaine reached out but didn't dare touch me. I'm so sorry, Audrey. Every day of my life, I regret agreeing to this, that I didn't fight for you. I looked at that woman, my biological mother, and saw the same pain I felt. The pain of loss, the pain of a lie that had lasted for decades. What about Thomas? I asked, wiping away my tears. Did he ever recognize me as his? Not as much as he should have. Elaine shook her head. He sent money for the first few years. He helped me finish my studies. But he was always afraid the truth would come out, that Margaret would find out that you weren't just some student's kid, but his own daughter. Margaret doesn't know? I was shocked. No. Elaine looked me straight in the eye. He told her the father was unknown, that I just slept with someone at a party. The whole picture finally came together, not just a lie, a double lie. Thomas had cheated on his wife, had a child out of wedlock, and then convinced her to raise the child, hiding the truth from everyone. And I, the victim of all these lies, spent my whole life trying to earn the love of a man who refused to recognize me as his blood. After meeting with Elaine, I spent several hours wandering the streets of Milwaukee, trying to process everything I had heard. Lauren insisted that I not be alone, but I needed space. My world turned upside down for the second time in a short time. First, I learned that I was not adopted, but taken. And now it turned out that the man I had thought of as just my father all my life was actually my biological father, who had abandoned me. The next week, I started going to therapy. Dr. Haley, a woman with kind eyes and a direct gaze, didn't try to reassure me or tell me what the right feelings were. It's okay to feel angry, she said at our first session, or confused, or even relieved that you finally know the truth. I feel all of them at the same time, I admitted. And it's exhausting. A revelation of this magnitude raises fundamental questions of identity, she nodded. Who am I if the story I knew about myself was a lie? It's not an easy question, and I really didn't know who I was. Was I still Audrey Finch? Was I now Audrey Vale? Or had I always been someone else I wasn't allowed to be? Elaine texted me a few days after our meeting. A short message. I'm here if you want to talk. No pressure. I didn't answer for 2 weeks, thinking it over. But then I decided that I didn't want to repeat other people's mistakes. I don't want to build my life on denial and running away from the truth. We met on neutral ground, in a park halfway between Chicago and Milwaukee. Elaine looked tense, but her eyes shone with hope when she saw me. Thank you for coming, she said. I still don't know how to feel about all of this, I answered honestly, but I think running away from the truth is not an option. We walked through the park, and the conversation was awkward at first, but gradually we began to open up to each other. Elaine told me about her life after she had given me away, how she had graduated from college, how she had gotten married but had been unable to have any more children because of complications from my birth. Maybe that was my payback, she said quietly, for giving you up. You shouldn't think that way, I replied, surprising myself with the compassion in my voice. You were young and scared. Thomas took advantage of that. But that doesn't absolve me of my responsibility. Elaine shook her head. I thought about you every day. Every year on your birthday, I lit a candle and blew it out, wishing you were happy. After that meeting, we started calling each other regularly. These were not easy conversations. Too much pain, too many lost years. But there was a truth in them that was never present in my conversations with the Finches. And in this truth, painful as it was, I found a certain healing. 2 months passed. At work, I focused on my new responsibilities, trying to prove that I deserved a promotion. And that's where I first met Dexter Kidd. He was the head of the IT department, but our paths rarely crossed before I had to launch a new marketing platform. Tall, with a mop of curly hair and thick-rimmed glasses, he didn't look like your typical IT guy. When I walked into the meeting, he was arguing with the vice president of sales, arguing for more time for testing. If we launch the system without proper testing, we risk losing customer confidence, he said, his voice calm but firm, and no amount of marketing gimmicks can fix that. I was impressed by this confidence. When the meeting was over, I walked up to him. Thank you for standing up for quality, I said. That's rare in a world where everyone just wants quick results. He smiled, and his brown eyes shone warmly behind his glasses. Thank you for your support. Not every marketing director understands the importance of technical stability. That's how our collaboration began, and it quickly grew into a friendship. Dexter was smart, funny, and unlike most men I dated before, completely sincere. We often stayed up late discussing the project and then switched to personal conversations. One evening, when we ordered food to the office, I told him about my situation. It sounds complicated, he said after a long pause, but I understand better than you think. And he told me his story. How he grew up in a series of foster homes, some of which were good, some of which were terrible. How, at 16, he finally found a permanent home with the kids, who later adopted him. How he searched for his biological parents and found a mother who wanted nothing to do with him. You know what I realized? He said, twirling a sushi stick in his hands. It's a choice. A choice to be there every day, to support, to love. His words touched something deep inside me. We stayed in the office until midnight, talking about identity, belonging, and the choices we make to define who we are. Our relationship developed slowly, cautiously, both with past wounds, both cautious of hope. But there was an honesty in that caution that I had never experienced before. Meanwhile, I received an unexpected offer from the company's management. They were opening a new office in Portland and wanted me to head up the marketing department there. It was a promotion, a bigger salary, and, most importantly, a chance to start over, away from the past. You should do it, Lauren said when I shared the news. It's the perfect opportunity to cut off all toxic ties and build a new life. What about Elaine? I asked. We've only just begun to get to know each other. Portland is not another continent, Lauren reminded me. There are airplanes, phones, video calls. When I told Dexter about the offer, he looked upset at first, but then smiled genuinely. This is a great opportunity for you, he said. Portland is known for its IT scene. Would you, would you consider moving? I asked, feeling my heart race. Not right away. He was honest as always. But after a while, why not? If you want to, of course. I hesitated with the decision. On the one hand, Portland was a chance for a new beginning. On the other hand, I had just begun to build a relationship with Elaine, with Dexter, with the real me. In the middle of these thoughts, I received a letter from St. Mary's Hospital. They confirmed that they had received my request for Amber Finch's medical records. I had not sent such a request. This meant that Ryan wasn't lying. His daughter really needed medical attention. I called the hospital and after several transfers spoke to the cardiologist who was in charge of Amber's case. He explained that the girl did indeed have a heart valve defect that required surgery. The operation was not urgent, but the sooner it was done, the fewer complications there would be in the future. Does insurance cover this? I asked. Partially, the doctor replied, but the family has to pay a significant amount before the operation. I thanked him for the information and hung up the phone. Then I sat for a long time, looking out the window at the Chicago skyline. Amber was an innocent child. She was not to blame for her grandparents' lies, for her father's manipulations. She didn't deserve to suffer because of my hurt. That same day, I called the hospital's financial department and arranged to pay for the portion of the hospital's bill that insurance didn't cover. But on one condition, Ryan and Melissa must not know it was me. We can say it's an anonymous donor, the receptionist suggested. Yes, I agreed. I thought that would be the end of it. But the next day, Ryan was waiting for me outside the office. He looked exhausted, his eyes red from insomnia. Well, the hospital said someone paid for Amber's surgery, he said without greeting me. It was you, wasn't it? Who cares? I walked past him to the entrance of the building. The important thing is that Amber gets the treatment she needs. Audrey, wait. He grabbed my hand. I have to tell you something. Something in his voice stopped me. I let him lead me to a coffee shop across the street. I knew, he said when we sat down. I knew you weren't Mom and Dad's biological daughter. I froze, feeling a familiar wave of pain rise in my chest. For how long? Since I was a teenager. He looked at his hands. One day, I heard them arguing. Mom said you needed to know the truth, and Dad insisted it would ruin everything. And you never told me. It wasn't a question. I was afraid. He looked up, and I saw real shame in his eyes. At first, I was afraid of losing my older sister. Then it became a habit. A lie that we all supported. And about Thomas being my biological father? Did you know about that too? Ryan flinched as if I'd hit him. What? No, I didn't know that. They said you were the daughter of some student who couldn't raise you. I was looking at my younger brother, a brother with whom we didn't share blood, but with whom we grew up under the same roof, who had received the love, acceptance, and support I needed so much all my life. I know this doesn't change anything, he said quietly but firmly, but I want you to know that I'm sorry. Not only for not telling you the truth, but also for the way you've been treated all these years. It was unfair. Unfair? I laughed bitterly. That's an understatement, Ryan. I know, he nodded, and I'm not asking for forgiveness. Not now. Maybe never. I just wanted you to know that I realize what we did, and I want to make it right, if you ever give me the chance. I looked at him for a long time, searching his eyes for the same manipulation I was used to from Thomas. I don't know if I can ever fully forgive, I finally said, but I'm glad Amber's going to be okay. Thank you, he said simply, for everything, and If you ever want to be a part of her life, she'd really like that. She asks about her Aunt Audrey all the time. That night, I made a decision. I called my supervisor and accepted the Portland offer. Then I called Elaine and told her about my plans. It's a long way away, she said, and I could hear the sadness in her voice. But I understand why you need the distance. It's not about being away from you, I replied. A life in which I define who I am and what is important to me. And you're a part of that life, if you want to be. I'd like that very much. Her voice trembled. The last call was to Dexter. When I told him about my decision, he smiled. You know, I have a vacation in 3 weeks, he said. How about I come down and help you get settled? And maybe scout out the local IT scene. I felt something warm swell in my chest, not passion, not addiction, but something calmer and deeper. I felt like I was finally on the right track. I would like that, I answered. Portland greeted me with rains, dense forests, and a sense of freedom I had never known before. A year passed unnoticed, a year of building a new life, a new self, free from other people's expectations and old resentments. My small house in the Selwood neighborhood overlooking the Willamette River has become a real refuge. Nothing grandiose. 2 bedrooms, a spacious study, a cozy kitchen, and most importantly, a terrace where I spent my mornings with a cup of coffee, watching the fog rise over the water. There were no memories here, no ghosts of the past. Just a blank page on which I wrote my new story. The work was enjoyable. The marketing department I headed doubled in size that year, and the management was so pleased with the results that they increased our budget for the next year. I finally felt that my work was valued for its true worth and not diminished by comparisons to more intellectual professions. Elaine and I talked every week. At first, our conversations were cautious. Too much unspoken pain, too many lost years weighed on us. But gradually, we found a common language. She came to see me twice, and I showed her around Portland, took her along my favorite trails in the woods, and told her about my work. She listened with the kind of sincere interest I had never felt from Margaret. "You are so much like me at your age," she said once, as we sat in a cafe overlooking the mountains. "And wiser." "I'm still learning," I replied. "How to be myself." "It's a lifelong work." Elaine smiled slightly. "But you've come a long way. I hardly ever talked to the Finch family." Sometimes Ryan would send short messages about Amber's condition, who had successfully undergone surgery and was recovering quickly. On her 9th birthday, I sent her a drawing kit. The girl showed a real talent for art. A few days later, I received a letter from her. A real paper postcard with a watercolor postcard and many grammatical errors. "Dear Aunt Audrey, thank you for the colors. They are the most beautiful I have ever had. Dad says you live very far away, but someday I will be able to visit you. I painted mountains for you because Daddy said you have mountains there." This child's letter made me cry for the first time in many months. It was the first genuine, unselfish affection I had felt from anyone in the Finch family. From that moment on, Amber and I began to correspond regularly. I didn't want to lose touch with this innocent child because of resentment toward her adults. With Dexter, we built a relationship slowly, giving each other space and time. 3 months after I moved in, he got a job offer at a tech company in Portland. And although the temptation to move right away was great, we decided to wait. He would come for weekends, and I would sometimes go back to Chicago. 8 months later, he did move, renting an apartment 15 minutes from my house. "I want to be close, but not impose," he explained his choice. And it worked. We spent weekends together, often had dinner after work, but each lived our own lives. I learned to trust without dissolving in the relationship. He was learning to be there for me without trying to save me. I continued online therapy with Dr. Haley, and these sessions helped me deal with the deep-rooted patterns that had formed over 32 years of living a lie. Slowly but surely, I began to accept myself with my flaws, fears, and dreams. And then, in late fall, When the first rains turned Portland into a city of water, something happened that I least expected. The doorbell rang, and I saw Margaret and Thomas Finch on my doorstep. They looked older than I remembered. Only a year had passed, but it seemed like 10. Margaret had lost a lot of weight, and her hair, which had been only slightly gray at the temples, was now almost completely gray. Thomas was hunched over, his once confident posture replaced by a defensive, tense one. "Audrey," Margaret's voice trembled. "I'm sorry to come unannounced." I stood there, unable to say a word. Part of me wanted to slam the door in their faces. The other part of me felt strangely relieved that I could finally talk to them face to face, with the whole truth on the table. "Come in," I finally said, stepping aside. They walked hesitantly into the living room, looking around as if expecting traps. I offered them tea, which they accepted gratefully, and we sat down at the kitchen table, the least private place in the house. "How did you find me?" I asked, pouring tea into cups. "Ryan," Margaret looked down at me. "He didn't want to say, but we had no choice." "What choice did you have?" I tried to sound neutral, but I could feel my whole body tense. Thomas cleared his throat. We're in financial trouble, Audrey." He spoke quieter than I'd ever heard him speak. "Serious trouble. Thomas invested our life savings in an investment scheme." Margaret spoke quickly, as if she was afraid she wouldn't make it. "He lost everything. The house is mortgaged. The creditors call every day. We could lose everything. And you came all the way across the country to ask me for money." Was not a question. I felt the familiar anger rising in my chest, but now it was somehow quieter, more distant. "Yes." Thomas finally looked me in the eye. "We have nowhere else to turn." I sat there in silence, looking at these two people who had raised me, who had lied to me all my life, and who now, in their desperation, came to me with their hand outstretched. I could have refused them. I could have reminded them of their own words. "You are not a real part of the family." I could have enjoyed my revenge. But instead, I felt something else. Not forgiveness. No. Rather, I felt understanding. Understanding that these people, with all their flaws and mistakes, were just people. "How much do you need?" I asked calmly. 80,000 to save the house," Thomas said quietly, but with a hint of hope in his voice. "We can pay it back when—" "No," I interrupted him. "I'm not giving you the money." Their faces darkened, and Thomas tensed, ready to argue, but I raised my hand. "But I will help you in another way," I continued. "I know a financial advisor who specializes in debt crises. I will pay for his services. And I can provide you with contacts for employment. Portland has a good job market, and your teaching experience could be valuable." "You're suggesting we move here?" Margaret looked stunned. "I'm offering you the opportunity to start over," I replied, "with an honest job instead of financial gambling. I'll help you with the down payment on the rent, but the rest will be on you." Margaret stared at me as if she were seeing me for the first time. "Why?" she whispered. "After everything after all the lies?" I took a deep breath. "Because I've realized something important over the past year. You can't change the past. The pain you caused me was real. Your lies were real. But I don't want to build the rest of my life on anger and resentment. I want to be a better person than the one you saw in me." Tears streamed down Margaret's cheeks. "I'm sorry," Margaret finally said, looking into my eyes. "I'm so sorry, Audrey. For everything. For not protecting you from Thomas's criticism. For not telling you the truth when you were ready to hear it. For comparing you to Ryan. You deserved better." Her words were sincere, and for the first time in my life, I could hear real remorse in her voice. "Thank you," I said quietly. "It means a lot to me." Thomas was still silent, his face stony. "What about you, Thomas?" I asked him bluntly. He looked up, and I saw the familiar stubbornness in his eyes. "I did what I thought was right. For all of us." For everyone except me, I argued calmly. He flinched at the mention of her name. You talked to her? Yes, I nodded. She's part of my life now. Part of who I am. She didn't have to tell. She told me the truth, Thomas. I interrupted him. Something you never did. And I'm grateful to her for that. I don't need your charity, he finally said. We can manage on our own. Thomas! Margaret turned to him, shock on her face. We can't refuse help. We can. He stood up. I won't take charity from. He stopped talking, but I knew what he was going to say. From someone who is not a real part of the family. From your biological daughter? I finished quietly for him. Because that's what I am, isn't it, Thomas? Although you've never had the courage to admit it. How did you? Elaine told me everything, and I didn't look away. How you seduced your student. How you abandoned your own child to save your reputation. How you lied to Margaret all those years. Margaret stared at Thomas, wide-eyed. What is she talking about? Her voice trembled. He lowered his head, avoiding her gaze. It doesn't matter now, he muttered. The past is the past. No, I shook my head. Not this time. No more lies. If you want my help, it will be on the condition of complete honesty. Thomas suddenly looked old and broken. I can't, he whispered. Don't ask me to. He turned and walked out of the kitchen, and a moment later, I heard the front door close. Margaret sat there, frozen and pale. Is it true? She finally asked. Are you his biological daughter? I nodded, feeling strangely relieved that this truth had finally been spoken out loud. Elaine was his student. They had a brief affair. When she got pregnant, he convinced her to give me to you, saying it would be best for everyone. And he knew? All along? Yes. Margaret covered her face with her hands, her shoulders shaking with silent sobs. My whole life was a lie, she whispered. Our marriage, our family, everything. I sat in silence, giving her time to process this information. Finally, she looked up, her face tearful. I would never. If I had known, I would never have treated you like this, Audrey. You are his daughter. Our daughter. I know, I said quietly. And that makes it all the more painful. We talked for another hour. She told me about how Thomas had lost money on increasingly risky investments, how he had become increasingly distant in recent years, how their marriage had gradually fallen apart. And I told her about my new life, about Dexter, about Elaine, about my friendship with Lauren. When it came time to say goodbye, Margaret hugged me, a real, sincere hug for the first time in years. I'm not asking you to forgive me, she said as she stepped back. But I want you to know that I'm proud of you. Thank you, I said. It means more to me than you know. And your offer of help, does it still stand? Yes, I nodded. But only for you, not for Thomas, unless he's willing to be honest. I understand, she sighed. And I think I'm ready to start over. On my own, if I have to. 3 months later, at Christmas, my house was full of laughter and warmth. Lauren flew in from Chicago, bringing her new girlfriend, Caitlin, with her. Elaine came from Milwaukee with homemade apple pie. Dexter, who was now spending more time at my house than at his apartment, was bustling around in the kitchen preparing his signature Christmas dinner. And, to my surprise, Margaret arrived that morning, alone, without Thomas. She had moved to Portland a month ago, found a job teaching literature at a local college, and rented a small apartment nearby. Our relationship was still fragile, but we were working on it, honestly, openly, without past resentments or secrets. The biggest surprise was the appearance of Ryan and Amber. They flew in for only 2 days. Melissa stayed home, not wanting to be part of the family reunion. But for me, it was the best gift of all. Amber, a bright and inquisitive 9-year-old girl, immediately became friends with Dexter, who showed her how to program simple robots. When we all gathered at the holiday table, I looked around and felt something warm flowing through my chest. Here they are, my real family, not bound only by blood or legal documents, but created out of love, honesty, and mutual respect. People who saw me for who I am and loved me, not for what I could give them, but simply for who I am. We raised our glasses in a toast. To a new chapter, I said, looking into the eyes of everyone at the table. And to the family we are choosing. To family, everyone repeated. And the sound of clinking glasses was the sweetest music I had ever heard.